out later.
Okay, so pause, stop recording. So we are recording right now. So hello, everyone. This is SJ Thomason with Christian-Apologists.com, and I have 4 very interesting Christians with me right now. We have 2 authors, and we have a woman who's with Women in Apologetics, and we have Craig Reed, who has a YouTube channel. So I want to go ahead and turn it over to our first author who joined me first tonight. We'll just go right in order of that. And that is Garte, Dr. Garte, who's a biochemist. He's also, was born and raised a militant Christian, militant communist atheist, and he converted. He had this miraculous conversion. He even called it pretty much a miracle. I saw that on Twitter today. And so I think that's really great. So we'll start with Cy. Cy, would you like to share a little information about yourself and about your book?
Sure. SJ's right. I was born in a very atheistic, materialistic household and grew up that way. Became a scientist. I have a PhD in biochemistry, and I have a long career in scientific research and administration. And at some point in my middle age, starting in my late 50s, I began considering Christianity. First thing I had to do was leave my atheism, and once I was able to do that, I was able to consider other things. And the whole story of my of that journey, as I call it, is documented in a book which is about to be released. Okay, I lost the screen. I'm a little confused.
Oh, I think I can see you over in the corner.
Okay.
Hey, Daniel, maybe undo your screen share right now, because I think that's what happened.
I ruined that. I didn't know I was going to affect. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. I like all the stuff you have on the screen.
A lot of books.
Oh man, I thought. Oh no, how did I do that? Oh, how do I get out of this?
Let me see if there's a way that I can do it.
Oh, here we go. Stop share. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, okay. No worries.
All right.
So, what should we do? Should you start again, or you want to just edit that out later, or something?
I can edit that out later.
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm not even. We could start again. You want to start again?
No,
I can see
that's
if I
all
can...
right. You'll just figure out how to edit some of that out. Let's see. So yeah. So I'll start with saying that I have documented the story of that journey from atheism to faith, which includes a lot of science and also direct experiences with the Holy Spirit and with Jesus. And I've documented it in this book, which will be released in about a month on November 19th. It's published by Kriegel, and it's called The Works of His Hands, and you can find it at the link below, a link to the web page that describes how to pre-order the book at a slightly discounted price, and some other offers that are there. So, and it will go be in bookstores and be delivered on the 19th of November.
That's great. Thank you. I'm excited to pre-order it. And I understand that you're also doing a chat on the 29th, correct? Is that going to be something that's live?
That's hosted by Dan, so he can answer that. I don't know. It's a podcast.
Cy and I will be podcasting, so I record my podcasts and then I edit them. I have not figured out how to be technically savvy enough to do a live broadcast yet. They took away Google Hangouts, and I cried my eyes out when I found that out. So Cy and I will be recording this way, but I'm going to use the audio for our podcast. And that will be out before the end of October. That'll be out probably on Halloween.
Excellent. And did you want to mention also your book? Because you have Story of the Cosmos.
Well, your channel has beat me to death, SJ. You read my book. I've been on your show twice, and so I appreciate the publicity. Thank you. Yeah, the Story of the Cosmos came out in July. I am not the only author, and I'm probably the least credentialed in the book, but it is a interdisciplinary look at the universe called The Story of the Cosmos, How the Heavens Declare the Glory of God. I co-edited it with Paul M. Gould, a philosopher, a Christian philosopher, and we have featured authors, William Lane Craig. We have the Vatican astronomer, Brother Guy Consolmagno. We have Michael Ward and Holly Ordway. A lot of different approaches on how the heavens declare the glory of God, not just in science, but in literature and history, in art and philosophy. It's a well-rounded book. Dream come true of mine ever since I don't know how long, wanting to give a voice to a church's response to Carl Sagan's Cosmos, because I don't think ever since that show came out that the church has really had a cohesive response to the science. More so now, it's coming into fashion, but I think rather than just focusing on the science like Carl Sagan did so well, he was very interdisciplinary. You know, he could bring together a lot of subjects. So that's what we tried to do. And it wasn't just one author's voice, it was multiple. So that was good to be a part of a group too. It's just, I'm blessed and privileged to have been a part of it.
It's a great
That's
book.
great.
I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you all for your Twitter support and YouTube support for it. It's been really cool. I found out from the publisher a couple weeks ago, we're close to 4,000 books sold since July.
Wow.
So
Great.
on average, about 1,000 books a month. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know.
Sounds good to me.
It's good.
I think
It's
and
good.
that's okay. But we'll take it.
Yeah, and I saw you have Lee Strobel, who even wrote a recommendation of the book. So
Yeah, Lee was very kind to do that. We sent him a copy and he endorsed it. So that was really cool as well.
yeah, really nice. So Craig, you got on here and you've got a video. I mean, Sarah, you have a YouTube channel yourself that you've been also promoting Christianity and dialogue between atheists and Christians. Would you like to share a little bit on that or about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Craig Reed. I've been on Twitter now probably about 3 years, and I have a YouTube channel where I interview a lot of atheists, a lot of the well-known atheists, Seth Andrews, Paul Gia, Shannon. And then I've interviewed a couple of Christians too, and then I also do my own little makeshift version of Apologetics, where I put out videos pretty frequently, actually. And then I've been covering just general topics of interest. I put out a video on the Joker. I put out a video on the Democratic debates. And I've been, I do my Twitter thing, interact with atheists and do my own little version of Apologetics. And that's about it. I've been on your channel many, many, many times. And you've been on my channel many, many, many times.
Actually, you all have.
We're like twin channels.
And it's fun to get to be on the same show with you, Craig. I've always been.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
You're your story of Cosmos, correct?
I'm the happy purple smiley face guy.
Okay. Yes. The happy. It doesn't match when I'm in here in the chat with you. It doesn't match I don't know. I always think the happy purple. I've until I realized that you wrote the book.
Uh-huh.
I thought of you. I always was thinking of you as like a 20-year-old, like in college. I never quite matched like how I started to perceive you. But anyways.
Some people think I'm a girl actually too, so that's kind of funny sometimes.
So yes, that is my YouTube channel. And on my YouTube channel, in the future, I'm probably going to be having more debates and more conversations, not just with me and whoever, but where like two people will come on and converse about a topic, perhaps Story of the Cosmos.
Hey.
We'll debate Jim Majors on the channel, or converse if they don't want to actually block horns.
Yeah.
Stuff like that I'm going to start doing in the future. So that's something to look for.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think Jim is very willing to debate. In fact, he even offered today to debate me. Again, I think I'm the low-hanging fruit. So.
Yeah, he's hungry. He's hungry for battle. I actually interviewed Jim on my channel. It was pretty intense. He was telling a story about how he read this letter, this impassioned letter to his congregation when he was a pastor, and he basically quit and became an atheist at church. He reads a letter to his congregation like, I no longer believe in Christianity anymore. And basically, I quit and I don't know what to believe. And
Wow.
It was pretty intense. He told us, he read the letter to us, to me, and John Buck helps me out a lot on the channel.
And Craig, I just want to say I like your style. I like what you do. I like the way you go about things, and I like listening to the chats that you do. So I haven't really got a chance to tell you that, but I like what you do. It's good.
Yes, thank you. I get a lot more peaceful interactions with atheists than most Christians. Very rarely do I get in conflicts. Every once in a while it happens, but not
Well,
very
I
often.
think you do a great job of. I mean, I'm sure you know the philosophy and stuff, but you do a great job of speaking outside the syllogism, which is so much of a hallmark of formal apologetics. You do a nice conversational way. You say the same things, but in a much different colloquial style.
Yes, well, that's exactly the point. I wanted to change the way the conversations happen. So when I
Yeah.
have people on my channel, it's not necessarily to debate them or prove that I'm right, which I am. It's to, listen to them and, let them tell me why they eat babies and why they think that's right. And, that's
So we also have Lisa Q here, Lisa Quintana, and she is an apologist. She's a woman apologist. We're one of the rare women apologist groups, and you also are part of Women in Apologetics. And I wanted to know if you want to share a little bit about yourself and any projects you're working on with that, or.
Yeah, so I would be one of those Christians that basically came to faith through a religious experience. So I rode this religious experience for like 20 years. And then I got challenged regularly in my faith, and I didn't have any good answers for why I believed what I believed. And so I was challenged to go ahead and pursue a master's degree at Biola in apologetics, which I got a couple years ago. And so since then, we developed this group of women from Biola that we met in the classes and stuff together. And we thought, well, gosh, there needs to be more women in apologetics. Why don't we, get sort of an organization going where we sort of highlight women and see what they're doing and feature, the female half of the Imago Dei. So that's what we do. We have a Women in Apologetics ministry. We have an annual conference where we highlight keynote speakers and breakout speakers that are all female. And so it's just a different kind of what you were saying earlier, with Craig, more of a relational aspect with apologetics. I think women bring that to the table maybe a little bit more just because of how we're made. We tend to be more relational, but I know that's a generalization. Not all are like that, but but anyway, so we have a sponsored Biola University is sponsoring the conference. We're going to have it in January, and I'm really glad because I live in Wisconsin, so I can fly to California in January and get out of the snow. So we talk about everything from the basic arguments for the existence of God, the resurrection. We talk a lot about cultural issues. Like this time around, we're talking about finding your voice as a woman. And I don't know if you saw today in the news, there's this big controversy now with John MacArthur, talking about Beth Moore and all this stuff. So this is one of the reasons why Women Apologetics exists, because there are.
What's the controversy, Beth Moore?
So there's just the whole controversy about women being able to teach men and whether or not they have a platform to be able to teach men or preach. And so that's one of the reasons why Women in Apologetics exists, because there are a lot of churches that won't allow women to teach or to preach or to use their gifts because of the way they interpret 1 Timothy 2:14 and 2:12, I think it is. So that's why we exist, because oftentimes, unfortunately, women don't have a voice. And so the controversy was, Beth Moore shouldn't be doing what she's doing.
Oh, gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So that's why we exist, because we give women who are in sort of that limited capacity and an opportunity to exercise their gifts in a place that they can.
Lisa, are you in the Mama Bears book?
I'm sorry?
Are you in the Mama Bears book?
I am not, but Hillary is one of my friends, and she should have had me write a chapter. The next book, she'll have me write a chapter, but no, Hillary's going to be one of our keynote speakers. She's actually on the board of directors for Women in Apologetics. And so, that whole book was a whole issue about dealing with cultural lies and how you talk to your kids about how to deal with cultural lies. And so she could put a different angle on that too. So so a lot of women are doing that. They're training up their kids on apologetics and how to. I mean, kids are asking questions younger and younger too. I mean, kids 7 years old now are being exposed to this relativistic worldview, and so it's really good. I mean, for kids to start knowing why they believe what they believe at a really young age. So that's part of what we do as well. So.
Yeah, I think the success of the Mama Bears, especially with the kiddos, takes you back to the idea that at a very young age, children are very perceptive. Our culture has forgotten about that. It's not
right.
that the kids have always been sponges and they've always been able to understand things. But you could have a scholar at 12 years old if you trained them up the proper way.
You certainly can.
Yeah.
I think we underestimate kids a lot.
Yeah.
So,
I
so
agree with that.
That's what women apologetics do. So I connected right away with SJ as a fellow woman in apologetics.
Mm.
Yeah, we did, and I've had you on a few times. Actually, it's been really nice. So that actually brings us to another topic, because you just mentioned relativism, and I was going to say, when we debate atheists, one of the things that we debate about is whether or not our morality, our moral values and duties are relative, so they're culturally contingent, or if they're objective. And from our viewpoint, they're objective and they're grounded in God. And I've debated atheists who actually will say, oh yeah, okay, I'll agree with you. They are objective, because they're these standards and these duties that are out there that don't change as a function of my opinion or your opinion. The duties are still there. And so do you think, and so then I've talked to some where they've argued that objective morality is grounded in consequentialism. So what they say is, we desire to seek well-being, and therefore the morality must also be grounded or sourced in the well-being. So it's kind of a circular argument. So I would make the argument that that's not valid. What do any of you think about that?
Well, I don't know how you can ground anything in consequentialism. I mean, what is that? That's not a physical thing. That's just a concept, right? I don't understand how that works. And I know that there's a lot of atheist philosophers who consider themselves moral realists. So they recognize that there is definitely some type of, objective morality, but they're not able to say what it's grounded in. So a lot of them, I think you're right. They either consequentialism or, just the fact that it's kind of a social thing and it evolved because it benefited society, like you wrote about in your blog. So, for me, I teach a little bit on this in my church, and I always say, well, what is it? What is object truth? Objective truth is in the object, right? Versus subject. And so it's gotta be in something outside of ourselves. It has to have a transcendent source. Otherwise it's ultimately subjective, and it can change. And so that's why I think, when you ground it in God, it'll always be there. It won't be fluctuating based on the flavor of the day.
Well, I'm sure that's an excellent point, Lisa. And I think one of the things I run into a lot, we all have, I'm sure, but the idea that the morality takes the atheist into the metaphysical realm. So he immediately has to sort of concede this metaphysical reality of morals and ethics, and you could even talk about mathematics and language, but there's that necessity of concession to something that is non-physical, and that's why they're uncomfortable with that. And as Cy can attest, no one's ever found a molecule that a moral molecule. You can't look at an atom or a proton or a quark or something and derive morality from something physical. So I think that the benefit of the moral argument for me has always been the establishment of agreeing with your atheist interlocutor that there is an abstract, non-physical realm with which we must constantly tango.
Yeah, Cy, did you want to add on to that? Because this does speak a little bit, a lot of them try to bring up evolution and social evolution in the argument.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that morality has a subjective aspect to it. We know that different cultures have different ways of being moral, and even one culture will change its moral stance with time. So there is a subjective quality that relates to societal pressures, but there's also, as you've been saying, as everyone has said, there's also a grounded, objective, universal morality. And what that really can come down to is just the simple fact that all human beings know the concept of right and wrong. That, in other words, most people, when they do something wrong, they know it and they feel a little guilty, maybe, or they'll rationalize it or whatever. And that's, where does that come from? I mean, that can't be traced to evolution. We don't have any evidence. I mean, occasionally you'll see a dog that looks guilty, but that's kind of a joke compared to what.
Dog that looks guilty.
What's that, Craig?
No, I thought the dog that looks guilty because he pooped in the house and he looks at you
right,
like, I know I did it.
Right.
I know I did it.
But that's because, he's been chastised a few times for doing that, and he's learning, because dogs are not dumb, they're pretty smart. But he's not born and no animal in the wild is born thinking about, gee, is this a good thing for me to do, or is it just a bad thing? You know, not good for me, but good as a moral sense, and that doesn't exist outside of humanity.
Yeah, the minimal facts there is the operant conditioning. It's just Pavlov.
Exactly.
And
Right.
Skinner,
Exactly.
the dog has been conditioned to, recognize when his master, the food source, is pleased and displeased. But beyond that, there's no moral consideration. I mean, they'll do it again. I had cats, they do it again. The dog will do it again.
Sure.
The animal will do it again. There's no moral repository of, I shouldn't do that. It's just a matter of like Skinner and operant conditioning and all that stuff.
Yeah, and so evolution is hard to explain. The other part about evolution is, in terms of morality, is that it's sort of self-defeating, because if moral sense were evolutionarily based, we would expect it to be hardwired, because evolutionarily based traits come from genes, and genes are pretty much hardwiring. I mean, you can make some changes, but just the fact that there are subjective morals and that different cultures and different people have certain different standards in morality suggests, well, that's obviously not part of evolution, because you wouldn't be able to change it. You wouldn't be able to, for example, if you are an atheist and you have one sense of morality, what's good and bad, you become a Christian and some of it changes, or if you go from one country to another, whatever. If your moral perspective changes, that's almost evidence that it's not likely to be evolutionarily caused through genetics, because you can't change your genes. So I think it's an attempt. I mean, it's one of those just so stories that atheists like to do with evolution in general. The whole field of evolutionary psychology does a lot of that. It says, well, here's the logical answer for why, and then whatever, why girls like pink and boys like blue. And they come up with a story, and most of the time you can actually find out that it's not true, and that they don't have any actual evidence. It's what we call a just so story. It fits the narrative, but there's no evidence for it.
I agree. That reminds me of the whole idea of, I can understand when you try to use biology to explain in-group favoritism, but when you talk about out-group favoritism, I think that's where there's a point where you say, well, that's what the evolutionary psychologist would say. Well, here's why people might be nice to people over in Africa or China or some other place right now. It's because blah, blah, blah.
I mean, and then they complain about us using, weak arguments. There's nothing weaker than that whole idea of spandrels. We evolved to be nice to our kin because of kin selection, and then that carried over to everybody else. Well, come on.
Right.
There's no evidence for that at all.
Well, the other part about with the evolution is there are parts of morality that would be maladaptive from an evolutionary point of view.
Absolutely.
If you think of it, you put like some really good-hearted, like hippie Christians, and you transpose them 6,000 years, or let's say 20,000 years into the past, and told them to survive, and you put some hardcore Nazis, same thing. Who's got better odds of surviving? Guess who's got better odds of surviving? The Nazis. But in terms of the moral argument where atheists find, where there's a school of atheism that is coming to the conclusion that morality is objective, I think that should be encouraged. I think that's a really positive development, and instead of trying to force them to the conclusion that this shows you God exists, it's kind of like, it's one of these like leading indicators. It's not if morality were subjective and it could be established that morality is subjective, then they'd have a really good argument that there probably isn't a God, because that would really indicate that there probably, so the idea that morality is objective should be encouraged when atheism find other ways to frame it, like well-being and things like that. I think we should encourage them and go, yeah, you're right. Morality is objective, and agree with them. And then somewhere down in the future, that will tend to indicate that there's a reason why morality is objective. So that's my own personal thing. I think it's a good thing when atheists find other ways to frame objective morality. I think it's a positive development.
I definitely think that they recognize that if we don't do that, it could be bad. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, look what happened to the Nazis, right? I mean, the Nazis were able to convince a whole society what they were doing was morally good to kill the Jews and the Gypsies, right?
Right.
So I think there is a recognition that subjective morality is not good. That objective morality has to be in place in some ways. I mean, even as Lewis talked about that, he talked about the Tao, right? This common universal knowing, like what you wrote about, SJ, in your blog. There's an innate sense of the right and wrong, and there seems to be a universal understanding of the golden rule, for instance. So these kinds of things, thank goodness they're there, because if they weren't, we would be in a situation, I think, where, whoever was in charge could dictate the morals of the day. And so what you're saying, Craig, is right. I think it's good that a lot of atheist philosophers, at least from what I understand, are actually starting to embrace that and starting to recognize the objective morality is actually a real thing. So what's it grounded in?
Yeah, and I think. Go ahead, Craig.
Go ahead. Well, just to tie on to that. Yes, if morality were subjective, then Nazis could be subjectively correct because their society told them they were doing the right thing.
Right.
And atheists recognize that to some degree, and also there's a whole really complicated Peterson-esque argument that that you were kind of alluding to, that even if we need to agree on objective moralities as a culture, if we are to survive together, and then there's underneath it all, a lot of atheists, even like Sam Harris, have a kind of universalist ethos, wherein like we're all one in humanity, and they don't recognize that as Christian, which it is.
Right.
But the fact that they recognize it is correct or right is really helpful to us in general, I think. Go ahead.
Sam Harris is a very interesting example because he has talked about objective morality, as you say, Craig, as being real. And of course, his view is that it comes from evolution. But then he says that he gets into a lot of arguments, and the only people who agree with him are theists. And so I think that goes along with what you're saying, is that we should encourage that view that the basic human views of good and evil, right and wrong, are very universal and totally objective. And where does that come from?
Yeah, right. I think the other issue, Lisa pointed it out, Lewis in Abolition of Man, the idea of this universal sense of right and wrong. You can look cross-culturally now and even in the past, and this is what Lewis did at the end of Abolition, compiling a list of cultures both in the ancient past, things that you can find to be universal. Adultery is bad. Lying is generally frowned upon. Murder is generally taken to be a terrible thing. Honoring your elders is really a good idea. Theft is bad. And these are just the basic foundational structures, moral strictures you can find cross-culturally, across time, across people, across geographical places and positions.
That's one of the things that I've said in my videos, that legal codes are, point to the idea that morality is objective, because otherwise they wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
And people always say, well, legal codes are subjective, but they're not. There's tons of overlap. They're not subjective like, your taste in music is subjective. Like my wife and I have completely different tastes in completely different CD collections, or whatever. Well, we link to different websites nowadays. We don't even have CDs anymore.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, if you're going to confess or admit, concede subjectivity, that makes no sense without a grounding in objectivity. There's no subject without an object. I think somebody said that already, but if you concede subjectivity, we are all subjects. The question is, what are we subjects of? Are we subjects of a purely natural process that accidentally put us here without any intentional ontology or teleology, no purpose? But in order to even speak intelligibly about subjectivity, there has to be some sort of, as SJ said, the ground. There has to be that object from which all subjects flow.
That,
Can I
that brings
ask-
us into, let me just say something really quickly. That brings us into 3 and 4, because both of those stem off of the same idea of human value. And the idea is, are we really more valuable than animals? And where do we even start value on a human life? So many people try to think that human life doesn't begin until either the heartbeat or maybe some say conception. I would say conception. Some say at birth even. Some say not even at birth. There are some people arguing for, if you're not happy with your infant when the infant's first born, then you could go ahead and terminate the infant. It's awful. So what do you think about either of those, everyone?
I think we're in a very Orwellian society, conditioning ourselves with certain technical parameters. That the idea of technology, I'm just reading this in Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot for our book club next month. This sort of messianic hope in our tool building culture, that we think our tools, as sophisticated as they might be, are going to be somehow capable of delivering us from the imperfection with which we all strive. But as science philosopher Mary Midgley said so wonderfully, she took Dawkins to task several years ago. But she's great. She's not a Christian, but she was really one of the first to go in and critique the new atheist philosophies. But she said, we cannot ever build a technology that's ever going to be capable of delivering us from our own error and sin, because we build our own presuppositions into these technologies. And so they're going to be naturally inbuilt with our own errors. And so they're never going to be able to be capable of being salvific. Just because a computer can compute math problems at an incredible rate of speed doesn't mean it's going to be able to deliver us from the problems. But if you read the sci-fi novels of culture, Orwell and Animal Farm and Aldous Huxley, A Brave New World, with Soma and the conditioning of human beings, the idea of technology, the oversight of all of this stuff, that we think that we have this in our own hands, and that the imago Dei, the human image, is the human image being created in God is gone. And so you remove that, and then human nature is incredibly malleable, just like dirt or plastic or titanium. We can do whatever we want to with our physical stuff, because there's no transcendent ontology guiding us in the realm of how we should order ourselves.
That's a very good point, Dan. And let me just say that I've been involved as a scientist, especially a biological scientist. I've been involved in some discussions and meetings and listening to some very smart people talking about the impact of human enhancement, genetic enhancement, and sometimes it comes up, artificial intelligence comes up, and various other technological changes, gene editing and things like that, to make people better, quote unquote.
Right.
And frankly, I'm horrified by all of it. I think I agree that it's not going to do any good. I also think it may do a lot of harm.
Yeah.
And it's something that Christians, especially Christians in the sciences and in technology, need to really start, working on and talking about, because who else is going to do it? There's this rush in the culture to use technology to do everything. And of course, I use GPS and I call Uber and I don't even think about it. That's fine. But when you start talking about changing the human genome, playing God isn't even close to what the real way to describe that is.
Very
scary.
yeah.
Horrific results.
Mary Shelley had it. I mean, you just have to read Frankenstein.
There you go.
A very prescient insight into what happens when you start messing with the human.
Or Faust.
Yeah, Faust as well.
If you hold with evolution, which most atheists do, you should know that evolution proceeds very slowly and very carefully. You can't, with lots of trial and error. And we are not only not as smart as God, we're certainly not as smart as evolution either. So, we're going to make errors that are going to be catastrophic.
Yeah. And even trilobites in the Cambrian have better eyes than we do. So what's that say?
But it boils down to, don't you think it boils down to what it means to be human?
Right.
So
Yes.
back to what SJ was saying about, life in the womb. When does a human being come into the world? Is it at conception, and what does that mean? And you know, this is the whole thing you're talking about could lead into AI, you know, and they're going to try to program AI. I mean, that's a whole nother area that's actually pretty frightening, because if you think about it, you can't program the soul, right? So you're not going to be able to program these objective morals we're talking about either into AI. You can do like what you were saying about presuppositions and bring that to the table, but somebody's got to program these things. And so whose morality is going to go into them?
Right.
Oh,
Right, exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's also off of what Dan was saying. That's one of the, when I was watching, there's a couple of videos out there with Matt Dillahunty where he talks about how secular morality is inherently superior to Christian morality. And the underlying unexpressed precept seems to be that, like, if we get super, super excited about science and super gay for empathy, we're all going to become morally perfect ourselves. And what Dan pointed out is the flaw in the whole system is that the flaw is in the person. If the person will be able to become morally perfect, then science could actually potentially be our salvation somewhere down the line. But science just magnifies, the flaw in human nature, and science only gives us our flaws bigger and in ways more potentially destructive. So
That's excellent. That's correct, Craig. Absolutely. I think that's what Huxley was onto. I think that's what Orwell was onto. The more you peer and pry and probe and poke without divine transcendence, the ultimate question, I think we were all touched on it, is who is defining the meta-narrative for the human genome?
Exactly. Two things I'll say on this subject. Brief. The Faust is my favorite of the one, because that was prior to the Industrial Revolution, and the whole point is the guy is selling his soul to the devil to acquire scientific knowledge, and it was sort of like a prophetic looking forward into the future. This is what we're doing. We're trying to acquire scientific knowledge, and we're placing too much importance on it. And even before I was a Christian, I remember saying this to my dad, that if we don't catch up spiritually, human beings, with our scientific understanding, we're going to destroy ourselves. So even when I wasn't a Christian, I was kind of like, that's a no-brainer. You know what I mean? It's fairly obvious. There's got to be some sort of ethical revolution in human beings. And if that's not Jesus Christ, then, it's not science.
Yeah, I totally agree, Craig. I think for my 2 cents, Jesus affirms life all the way down to the first cell.
right.
That's how he came in, and he affirms it all the way through death, and that's how he went out. And we are human from point A to point B in every way that Jesus is, because we are made in his image.
That's one of the things that Jordan Peterson emphasizes a lot, is the value of the individual, because he talks going back to Jesus's time. He talks about the value of the collective much more so before Jesus came in the picture, and basically gave each human, including women and babies and everyone else, value. And I think that's been a game changer for the last 2,000 years.
That's right.
So what would you say about the ordering of, and Sai is probably the biggest expert, is the biggest expert on this topic, but the DNA, I think I've listened to different people have different ways to phrase this. And I listened to, what's his name? John something over in England. I'm forgetting his last name, but he's the mathematician.
John Lennox.
John
Lennox. Yeah, he always talks about, he uses that thing with what happens if you go to the beach and you see the words, I love you. And then you look at the fact that you look at DNA and you look at how complex it is and how well it's structured and ordered, and with 3.5 billion, what they call letters. So I know it's just a term to call it letters, but I think that just looking at that, I think would make me think, well, wait a second, now, how did that all come about? I would assume an intelligent force wrote that on the beach. So why wouldn't I assume that an intelligent force wrote that into our systems?
It's a very interesting thing that you bring up about DNA, because people have been saying for a long time, in fact, since 1953, when the structure of DNA was discovered, that DNA is an information and it codes for protein synthesis. And what's interesting now is a new meme has developed in the atheist argument, which is that DNA is not a code. It's not the main source of information. It doesn't have information at all. It's only a molecule. This is all patent nonsense. It's it's contradicted by every textbook. I don't know whether they're going to start changing the textbooks, but this is a religious view that is nonsensical. There's no question that DNA is the first example of true information in the universe where one thing means something else. Okay, so the sequence of DNA bases is a chemical structure that means make this protein. And that's never occurred in the universe before, and it has never occurred in the universe after, except in life, which is based on that code. So there's no question that the argument for DNA as the first case of information is something that's brand new in the universe, very likely, in my view, is a sign of God's divine action. Now, we don't know that there may be a natural explanation for how DNA arrived at. We don't know, but if there is, that doesn't negate the idea that this is part of God's tool, because you need that kind of information to have evolution, to have life, to have everything we know of. So I'm very disturbed, and I've not only written, I've also had a couple of debates with people on this topic of whether or not DNA is truly a code, whether it really has information. And it's a very easy debate to win, and I haven't lost any of them yet, because all I have to do is go to my shelf and take down one of the standard textbooks, and I just open it up and read the text, where it clearly says DNA contains all the information needed to create proteins. So I'm disturbed that so many atheists on Twitter, for example, will say, no, DNA is just a molecule. Well, that's a meaningless statement. So if you come across it, tell them they're wrong.
That's fantastic. And I think that what might be nice, if anyone here in this little group or who is listening would like to take portions of this video out to respond to atheists who are making that claim, that might not be such a bad idea. A little 5-minute.
Well, it's like classic misinformation. It's like the same thing they do with it's the same thing that gets done with Hitler was a Christian. Because of these two pieces of irrelevant information. They would know he was.
Neither one is true. That's right.
Well, it's funny too with Hitler as a Christian. I'm like, my response to that on Twitter is, so you still believe the guy, huh?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's how he got away with running.
That's right. He said it once. That's right.
He said it once. So, gosh, let's just
let's believe
Hitler.
Him. He was right about everything else, right?
Yeah, that's right. So,
but there seems to be a point where there's a hyper skepticism going on in that.
Right.
Like I think what I've run across, and you guys probably have as well, is you give all these great evidences, and you still have them coming up with reasons why they're not going to believe.
Sure.
I think they're committed to naturalism. They're committed to this. And if you're just not, no matter what you say, no matter how many books you pull off the shelf side, if they're really going to just say, no, I'm going to come up with another excuse. I just kind of like, at that point, he's like, what are you going to do? You know?
Right. It's a religious view. The thing that always amuses me is when you start hearing atheists say, no, I don't have any religious views. I simply don't believe in any God.
Right.
Not true. There's a whole list of atheist belief systems, which is not constant. It keeps changing because they respond to arguments from apologists with this kind of denial of reality. And they have they don't believe humans are exceptional. They don't believe in any kind of human exceptionalism, or that humans are different from anything else. They don't believe in free will. They don't believe in the idea of a soul, or not even in consciousness, some of them. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I could go on. I mean, there's a whole list of these things. And when you challenge many of them, not all, but many of them, they say, no, that's not an atheist belief. I just happen to hold that view, which they got directly from either Daniel Dennett or Sam Harris.
Right. Well, the scary part of some of the smarter ones, like Daniel Dennett, is like, you can fabricate a really convincing sounding philosophical argument. pretty sure he's the one who says consciousness is an illusion, right? That's him.
He is, yes.
And the free will argument, that one starts to scare me, because you can hyper intellectualize it to the point where it sounds convincing to someone who doesn't know any better, and then you have to be really, really sharp in order to catch the oh, I gotta go for a sec. Hold on.
What happened?
Craig, you all right?
Okay, is that him I hear? He's right though. I mean, I just look at, I listen to people like Lawrence Krauss when he's talking about, and this goes into another topic that I also wanted to talk a little bit about, is the structure of the universe and the Big Bang and things like that. And Lawrence Krauss, everyone was okay with, oh yes, there must have been a force beyond the Big Bang that's transcended to time, space, and matter. And even Einstein had some issues with that, which is why he delayed on his beliefs. But then it comes back, and Krauss makes up this whole thing with sort of quantum fluctuations that nobody really understands that well, from what I've heard. And it seems plausible to the atheists. That sounds great. Hey, we just solved that problem.
Now, what Krauss says, which is really interesting, is that a universe can come from nothing through natural means. And then he talks about quantum fluctuations, but what he leaves out is that quantum fluctuations occur in space. And before the Big Bang, there was no space. So everything he says has nothing to do, well, Dan, you should talk about this. I mean, this is in your area, right? I mean,
well, it's interesting because Peter Atkins, who has debated John Lennox, has just come out with a book called Conjuring the Universe. And Atkins is literally far more literal about nothing than Krauss is. Krauss equivocates philosophically on the term nothing, and Bill Craig has taken him to task on that. And so has a book review in the New York Times, and so have other philosophers who are not necessarily friends of theism.
Right.
His philosophical equivocations they're pointless. So it's not. Atkins, on the other hand, is steadfastly confessing and conceding absolutely nothing at all. Because quanta, all that word means is like packet. So, you know, those little laundry soap packets, or a packet of M&Ms, or a little M&M or a Skittle or something. You can imagine something so fundamentally small. So here, you know, as I've said to several atheists in very colloquial terms, because you can get very complicated with the physics, and you can just do like a Google search of all the different kinds of cosmologies and structures that are out there, and you're getting into like talking to the Mad Hatter at the table in Alice in Wonderland at some point, and they're so inconceivably undecipherable for 99% of the human population that they almost have absolutely no pertinent relevance, except that the scientist in our culture gets a free pass just because a scientist said it, just because a cosmologist said it, just because somebody peered through the Hubble Space Telescope or has a peer-reviewed paper about the physics of quantum theory. He gets to say whatever he wants. And so,
well, there's one exception. Let me interrupt. There's only one exception for that, and that is if the scientist talks about God.
That's right, Si. There you go. That's absolutely right.
Which I know from personal experience, as many of my friends.
Right, but if a scientist talks about God, Si, then you've jumped ship. You're
not a real scientist.
You're not being rational. You hate science.
Right. I can send you my Twitter feed.
Yeah, you hate science. You don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know what I'm talking about. Right.
But I break it down this way. It's like, okay, so you skeptics, you criticize talking snakes and talking donkeys and whatever else you want to talk about, but then you will go to something like the universe coming out of a subatomic particle. So you're going to talk about the ginormity of our cosmos coming from something smaller, far more smaller than a period at the end of the sentence, and you're going to deride and chastise a Christian for believing in miracles. I mean, Christian theology doesn't even go to that extreme in terms of what it claims, because there's nothing like, I mean, to me, it's more miraculous to think that a universe of our scale and size came from something like a small quanta or a subatomic particle or a singularity of infinite density. But if you look very carefully at the colloquial language that's used in cosmological theories from secular science, they borrow heavily. It's like they went to a garage sale at a church and bought our concept for a few dollars. They talk about a singularity from which is really hot and dense and infinite. So the words infinite and eternal come up. So you have a singularity and there's something about infinity and eternity, and then the singularity from the singularity emits these fixed laws, and the laws govern the universe, right? So it starts to sound like, monotheism, very specifically, without the God seated there. So
but that's the other part of the equation, because I've mentioned that a couple of times in videos. If you link on religion and science in like TED Talks, the new like quantum mechanics and the new fields in science are actually starting to, like, when science and religion split, they're actually starting to come back together.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's Michio. I don't want to kill his name. Michio Kaku. He's a brilliant physicist.
Right.
I think he's been more concessional, if he's not outrightly concessional, to a kind of theistic concept of the universe.
Right, because the basic breaking off point was like, with Darwin and in a sense, there was a logic to it. But now that science is going to a different place and deeper, and this sort of happened in the 20s, if I think, Sai, or you can probably correct me, but when they started, going into new places in quantum mechanics,
right,
they start the materialist universe started to lose the idea of the materialist universe started to disappear.
That was exactly what started me questioning atheism, was when I started studying quantum theory and in college, and Schrodinger equation and all that stuff, because I started as a chemistry major. And I said, wait a minute, what? What are you saying? I mean, this is real? I mean, this it doesn't fit with materialism at all. So
doesn't fit with material, and the hidden implications are theological, not necessarily Christian. But they sound like Taoists, at least, or like there's spiritual implications for a lot of it.
Yeah, there was a book written by Werner Heisenberg in the middle of the 20th century called Physics and Philosophy, and Heisenberg, wisely observed something that C.S. Lewis observed almost at the same time. Their thoughts on this are nearly identical. That the universe, the physical world, is, our perception of it is only as good as the questions that we put to it. And so this gets back to the idea of technology, that you ask a question, and that question comes rooted in a particular view about the world. So if you think that the secrets to the universe are all matter, you're going to build technology to detect particles. So there's assumptions that go into the questions, but the answers that we get are only in relations to the kinds of questions that we ask. So Lewis said so clearly, and I think it was one of the Narnia Chronicles, I think it was The Magician's Nephew. A lot of what you see depends on where you're standing and the kind of person that you are. So the questions that are being asked and put to the universe are assuming a particular materialistic, naturalistic philosophy, and that the explanations, that's a tractor. I apologize for the background noise. But the materialistic assumptions go into the questions that we ask. And so if you're going to argue, for example, that God somehow, or science somehow has disproved God, the assumption there is that the tools and the technology, the microscopes and the telescopes, could detect God in the first place. And it's very naturalistic, very materialistic. But the assumptions, as Craig and you have said, Sai, that they're metaphysical assumptions. They're philosophical assumptions. They're not really a strict, logical, linear, materialistic.
But they're also starting to shift.
Yeah, right. There's that
in ways that where like the actual real scientists, like the really hardcore egghead intellectual scientists, are starting to sound more like spiritual gurus, because there's whole avenues of exploration where, the idea that we can't detect God through science is potentially not true. Put it that way. It's that we just don't have the tools and the know-how of that particular avenue of exploration. But it's looking more and more like that's just a precept that will be proven wrong soon.
Yeah, and more the popular cosmological tomes that come out, Sean Carroll, Lawrence Krauss, you name it, they're starting to sound more like philosophers than hard physical empiricists. I mean, cosmology is a largely theoretical discipline, unlike biology, where you can actually look at things. Cosmology deals in particulars that are unobservable to the human eye.
Well, they're also going into the whole multiverse thing now, though. They're all.
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be their reason for the Big Bang. It's like, oh, well, this is, there's a bunch of Big Bangs and they all spotted out a bunch of universes that, and we got lucky. We got the lucky roll of the dice. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's in like Marvel Comics now and Doctor Strange. That stuff.
Yeah.
The idea that the multiverse itself is metaphysical.
Yeah.
And it's really, like I said a few minutes ago, it's a concession to monotheism, because what are you doing? You're suggesting other worlds, you're suggesting other laws, you're suggesting things that are contrary to the currently known physics that brought about our universe. And even Sean Carroll, I think Dr. Carroll is coming out with a new book, if it's not out already, where he's postulated this multiverse, or these many worlds hypothesis, which is something that Alexander Vilenkin had posited several years ago, where there are people in other universes having conversations just like this, that the universe, the cosmos, is filled with our doppelgangers. And this is seriously advocated as a position in contemporary cutting-edge cosmology. And if you don't agree with it, well, you're not a scientist. How many peer-reviewed papers do you have? So on the one hand,
they have zero proof on that, though. That's
right, Stephanie. On the one hand,
no evidence.
There's no evidence. But on the one hand, this is a very interesting contrast with cosmology and observational astronomy. So the observational astronomers are hard at work with planetary telescopes, trying to find planets transiting suns, looking for physical data of what kinds of planets might be out there like ours, and they're doing observational astronomy, and they haven't found any sign of life yet. So you have that aspect of science. And then you have the theoretical cosmologists saying that there are billions of Stephanie Thompsons out there. And the two couldn't be at any more odds at the ends of this continuum of what we call science. One of them is actually observational astronomy. The other one is pure metaphysics, philosophy, and theoretical constructs.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it's crazy. It actually seems like they have, like Frank Turek says, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I think that's a good thing. Let me ask you this. My eighth point on this issue was talking about Jesus' resurrection. And I've seen all of us have debated at one time or another, different people, either if it's on Twitter or if it's outside in a debate on YouTube or something, about Jesus and his miracles. And I think the minimal facts are pretty convincing. Some people would say undesigned coincidences are convincing. What do you think? Do you think that these are convincing arguments for Jesus? And the minimal facts idea is we take the facts together. Like we look at the fact that we know that the people extra biblically have pointed out that Jesus died on the cross. He was buried. This was under Pontius Pilate. On the third day, his apostles came out and they said, after they were hiding, they came out and they said that they'd seen the risen Jesus. And so when you take those pieces of information together, along with the fact that then they preached for decades despite being persecuted, how do we explain all of that together? And to me, the only way to explain all of those points together is that Jesus resurrected. And so I think that itself is convincing. That's Gary Habermas's dissertation, apparently.
You also have to go to motivations. Like what would motivate them to lie about that kind of thing? I mean, they didn't get anything from it. They didn't get notoriety. They didn't get fame or power or sex or whatever you normally are motivated by. They got chastised, persecuted, died poor. I mean, so to me, that's a big point also, is that, their motivations, were purely because they believed what they saw. So I think that's pretty convincing.
I think this is another example where the arguments against Jesus' resurrection are kind of desperate and completely, on the face of them, they just don't hold up. The evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the historical evidence that we have, which both Lisa and SJ have mentioned, this is stronger evidence than for almost any other event that has occurred in history. And I'm even including events that I was alive in, that I actually saw. And there's huge dispute about what actually happened at that particular time in that particular place, because that's the nature of history. It gets distorted quickly, but the evidence for Jesus' resurrection is overwhelming. And I had an online debate. It wasn't on, I'm sorry, it wasn't on YouTube. It was just on Twitter with Paul Oja, who, I think many of you know him, and he's a former Christian. And he was saying that I asked him if he had another explanation for the rise of Christianity, which was extremely rapid. And he said, yeah, after Jesus died, Peter, not Paul, he didn't even talk about Paul. He said Peter spread the word and everyone began to believe. And I said, Peter was illiterate. he had 30 friends. How is he going to get a church established in Ephesia and, in Galatia and all these other places in Asia and throughout not to mention Rome? How did that happen from Peter talking to people?
A fisherman.
It's like, if you're going to deny the resurrection of Christ and everything that is in Acts, which to me reads like an absolute history text, come up with a better answer. And I don't see one. Ever.
Craig Keener, a scholar who just did a book on miracles. I just saw these guys over the weekend. I went to a defense, it was called the Defense Media Conference, where Bart Ehrman was there, Mike Lacona, Craig Keener, and some other guys, and they were talking about how the rise of Christianity developed. And he was saying that a lot of it, Craig Keener documents miracles. So Peter may not have been able to articulate things like you were saying, but they were praying for people and things were happening.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a big sign of why the church actually did grow so fast, because people were seeing these guys walking these wonders.
That's right. They were traveling and doing miracles, but you have to deny all of that. If you're an atheist, you can't accept anything. So it's like, this illiterate guy is walking around. I mean, how is he going to travel anywhere? And somehow his word, people believed it and it spread. Come on, let's be realistic.
Yeah.
You talk about, believing fairy tales. That's a fairy tale.
Well, I think it's interesting for me. One thing, somebody asked me the other day, how helpful is it to talk to people on Twitter about stuff like this? And I said, well, there's a couple of good lessons I've learned. One is that most skeptical arguments can be dismissed in 240 characters or less. And it really has over the months. I mean, it's short-circuited my thinking in some ways, but in other ways, I've learned that a lot of these responses are really jejune and banal. One of them is one of the constant objections we've all seen is, well, the gospel writers, whoever they were writing some 30 to 60 years after the events that they're writing about. And I said, so the gospel writers are anonymous, check, and they're writing 50 years after the events in question, check. Then I say, well, you're anonymous and you're writing 2,000 years later by your own standards. You've disabled any sort of intelligent input to go forth from what you're saying. You've eliminated yourself by your own standards. But it's interesting. It brings up the point that if you really nail down the criteria, if you use the same skeptical criteria on the New Testament texts, let's say, on an evolutionary construct of what has happened over billions of years. Most of the tales that we hear, the ad hoc explanations, as Cy was talking about earlier, have been constructed since 1859. So here we are writing billions of years after the fact, where there is no eyewitnesses, there are no documents, there is nothing. So if you apply the same sort of critical skepticism to the New Testament, to evolutionary constructs that we're given, they fall apart. And history falls apart. If you're that critical of all of history, if you're that critical of Scripture, which passes, I mean, it's historical gold in terms of the amounts of manuscripts, the reliability, the universality, the testimony over the cross-cultural testimony, even in the 1st and 2nd, 3rd centuries. You apply all of this, and there's nothing, historically speaking, that comes anywhere close to. The only other thing that even comes remotely close is Homer, in terms of manuscripts and things of this nature. But in terms of historical accuracy, historical reliability, manuscript availability, the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. I mean, if you want to throw that history out, then basically you have no past. but that's kind of how propaganda starts. If you can stop teaching history, if you can ignore history, start with a blank slate and start, reconstructing history, that's propaganda. Is the first step toward propaganda is a dismissal of the importance of history, I think. So that's what's happening. But I think it's David Wood who does a great 10-minute video on skepticism gone awry, or skepticism, denial as a form of skepticism.
Is that the one with Scooby-Doo?
Oh gosh, I love that one. But he's spot on. There's a point where skepticism just reveals itself for the denial that it is, and I think that's where a lot of the criticism leveled at the New Testament really does reveal itself as nothing more than just abject denial.
Well, it's really interesting. This weekend when I went to this conference, Bart Ehrman was there, and he was invited by the Apologetics team, which I thought was pretty big of them, to speak about Bible contradictions and all those kinds of things, and all the errors he points out and regarding how things were recorded or whatever. But he goes on to say that it wasn't even the contradictions or the things that he supposedly found in the New Testament Gospels that caused him to lose his faith. It was the problem of evil. So he says it wasn't the scholarship, it was the problem of evil. And then he encouraged all of us to be open-minded to the evidence of the contradictions in the New Testament Gospels, and yet he wasn't open-minded to the good evidences for why God allows evil. He said he heard the arguments and he just doesn't believe them. And so,
Oh, he's probably making millions on his book, but I want to point out something really quickly about Bart Ehrman. Is his second edition of Misquoting Jesus. He has this little thing in the appendix about his Bruce Metzger and his who is his mentor, who's a Christian who recently passed away. But he mentioned in his second edition that the core tenets have not been destroyed or anything. So everything that we believe now that's in the New Testament, the core tenets of Christianity are there. So the resurrection's there. So he's not saying that that's not part of it. He picked out these little random side things, I think, that don't really...
Well, he picks out things that are typical of eyewitnesses that see things a little differently. Right. Like today, what are we going to remember of each other? Oh, I'll remember Cy had a red shirt on. You might remember Cy had his earphones on. I mean, so we'll have little things we'll say differently, but we're at the same event. And so that's what he points out. And so there's some stuff that's, tough to reconcile, but the bottom line is he said at the conference himself that even with those things, that wasn't what caused him to lose his faith. So
it's funny. It's funny, Lisa. Bart did a debate with a friend of mine, Justin Bass. You know Justin? Does anybody know Justin? Justin Bass and Bart Ehrman. And at the end, I think it was Q&A, or maybe towards the end of the debate, he was giving his closing remarks, and he was citing research on what you just said, Lisa, about the variability of eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
That was conducted and documented, that eyewitnesses who are steadfastly claiming that, oh no, her walls were pink, and oh no, that shirt was green, or her hair was blonde. These details, and I wish I was there to ask him the question, but the interesting conundrum of researchers doing research on the unreliability of eyewitness testimony rely upon the eyewitness testimony of the researchers who saw the unreliability of the eyewitness testimony. So at some level, the whole point is that you have to accept at a certain level that eyewitness testimony is indeed credible. It is indeed part of how we do things. And what it boils down to is, do you trust the eyewitness? Does the eyewitness have any reason to lie?
Right.
And okay, they might get the details wrong, but you can't just throw out carte blanche eyewitness testimony as being so unreliable that we can't rely upon it in terms of what the gospel said. And again, that goes back to what we were saying earlier. You're just throwing out history.
Right.
I mean, that's really what you're doing. So you can be skeptical to a point that just annihilates basically every other means or ability to be able to say something intelligent about the past.
Exactly.
I just started reading his Problem of Evil book, actually, and in the preface, he underscores the problem with the problem of evil from people like him, because what he does, I was going to make a video on it because it actually kind of bothers me, because what he does is he's talking about this in the preface of the book, and he's talking about being at he's talking about being in England somewhere with his beautiful wife, and he's outside of this conference preparing to give this lecture, and he's going through the details of his life. And you're seeing firsthand this blessed, totally fortunate. And then he says, but he can't reconcile. He can't reconcile this abstract evil out there. Like, I turn on my TV screen and there's starving people in Africa, and I can't think that God is good or benevolent with allowing all this. So he's giving God all of giving God omnipotence and giving him all the blame for everything that happens out there that's evil. But he's not taking it personally at all and giving him any credit for anything in his own life. So he's only giving him one part of the equation. He's saying, if there's a God who's omnipotent and totally sovereign and in control, then he's responsible for all this evil in the world. But he doesn't give him any responsibility for any of the good directly that he experiences in his own life. And that's a common thing. I mean, that's like, as far as every single atheist I've ever known does that. Like, they differentiate between God as an abstraction and good that I experience. I'm not sure if that completely makes sense, but it drives me crazy because all of them do it.
Well, I like the fact that he has a sense of justice. And so that's those innate morals we were talking about, the innate sense of things. He knows that something's wrong, right? So he has this innate anger about that. He thinks God should have done it differently. And I think that that's what a lot of atheists don't like God about. They're just like, he should have done it this way. Or why didn't he make utopia now? It's like, I think they don't understand the whole problem of good and evil. I mean, you could go back right to the garden, right? I mean, every narrative in our entire world is about the good and evil. It's all a struggle between good and evil. That's what we're learning here. And that's what life's about. It's like, the angel on one side and the devil on the other, right? I mean,
right.
So I think that without understanding that God is weeding out people throughout history to be in the ultimate utopia, which is heaven someday. I mean, he wants it now, and everybody wants it right now. And so I think that that's why there's a confusion about what God is doing. They don't understand the bigger narrative.
Yeah, I totally agree. Can I ask Dan a question, Stephanie?
Absolutely.
Dan, do you know the Phaser 5 Proofs of God book?
Yes, I have it.
Do you know? Okay, the one I'm curious about.
Uh-huh.
The argument from eternal truth, because when you were talking right at the beginning of this chat, you started saying things that are kind of in line with that. What do you think of that particular argument?
Well, it's been a while. I picked up Phaser to refresh my familiarity with the older proofs, if you will. I have not dealt enough with that argument. Where is that? I haven't even.
I have that, but I haven't read it yet.
Give me
that's the closest one to what I think is actually. It's not quite a good, successful argument as he frames it, but there's such a thing as mathematical truths. It's very similar to what you were saying at the beginning of this chat.
The idea that right. I got it. The idea that if you go like Roger Penrose, he and Bill Craig just had a chat on Unbelievable. And Roger conceded to, he's always done this, he's always conceded to some sort of objective, abstract reality. He has mathematics kind of in a Platonic realm, the ideal realm in Platonism. And Bill, congratulated him for that because it goes against the sort of the logical positivism that pervades a lot of materialistic empirical science. But if you're going to go, I think what the argument basically says is that it shows when you're talking about cosmology, the beginning of the universe, or laws, or morality, that there is an abstract realm that does seem to be objectively verifiable, that does require, especially with Aquinas, that there has to be a final cause for these things. And that final cause has to be pre-existing, infinite or eternal, however you want to go it, because you cannot, it gets back to the idea of having, not being able to logically have an infinite regress of something in physical reality. So I think, but I'd have to go back and really formally look at the argument. I think that's basically the gist of it, that somehow we get to a concept of an always existing realm, or an always existing entity, or an always existing concept from which all concepts come, whether that's nothing, a quantum particle, God. There has to be something that pre-exists everything else. I think
Amen.
I think that's
Amen. Preach it.
Hey, I was thinking we should probably, we're getting towards the end. We've covered most of the questions. The one thing we didn't mention is the argument from Joy and this idea of if you have a desire that nothing in this world can fulfill, then there must be a greater world that you belong to. So I love that C.S. Lewis argument. But I wanted to see if each of us wanted to kind of go around and close up a little bit and just maybe offer some final comments.
Well, I'll say one final thing and then I got to run. I always go back to the argument, did mind create matter or did matter create mind? I mean, it's kind of simplistic, but it's really easy to remember. To me, it makes a lot more sense that mind would create matter. Mind has intentionality behind it. How can matter create anything? It doesn't have any intention. I know Daniel Dennett argues against that, but I just think that is common sense. I mean, there's common sense that we need to talk about. And one other final thing I think is really important is religious experience. It's like all these things that we're talking about. I mean, we all have come to faith through some type of experience. You know, so you can have all the head knowledge in the world, but if you don't have the head connect to the heart, there's going to be a disconnect. So I think that there's sometimes people just don't have that. So I would just encourage people to seek religious experience with all the head knowledge, because that's where you really connect everything together.
Yeah,
Amen.
I totally agree with that. That's 80% of this stuff I talk about.
Yeah, and I think
that's the whole ball game.
It is. Lisa brings up the point. I mean, this is the naturalistic virgin birth. You can have conscience and sentience coming out of non-conscience, inorganic material. Life arising from non-life. I know evolution doesn't speak to abiogenesis, but every time you talk about evolution, you end up there. But that is the naturalistic miracle. From non-organic, non-sentient, non-purpose directed matter comes emotion, sentience, joy. The whole gamut of our human experience is just, it's the modern form of alchemy. Certainly there must be some sort of material arrangement. If we can only find that exact material arrangement, we too can change matter into sentient beings.
Yeah,
this is the AI quest. It's the modern alchemist quest. It's not gold anymore. It's how do we make intelligence?
Good.
So that's a good jumping off point for me, because what I like to say is that, I was studying biology and learning about evolution and other issues in biology, and I came across the origin of life. And this is a long time ago, but we have not made any progress in the subsequent 40 years. It's very, very difficult to understand how life could have started. And what Dan just said is perfect. We're going from one state, which is, you could define it as just the state of matter and energy, to another state, which includes consciousness, emotion, everything that we think of as human, and everything we think of as zoological and botanical. I mean, life is an amazing set of systems that there's some connection between the two that does not seem to be easily or even perhaps at all visible. And so what I like to say, and just to wrap up, is that what Lisa was talking about, I think, is really important. And I know in my case, I now know that I was called by God many times while I was still an atheist, but couldn't hear it at all. And when I think back, I remember incidents that were absolute, I'm now convinced, was the Holy Spirit trying to get my attention, pulling on my sleeve, knocking me on the head, various things. And I just wasn't listening because I already knew the truth, which was that there's no supernatural, everything is just materialism. It was only when I was able, through science, to learn that whole materialistic, atheistic wall of absolute certainty had cracks in it, and then I followed the cracks until the whole wall fell down. Then I could make contact, or I should say the other way around. The Holy Spirit could make contact with me. And that was what led me to faith. So I think I've seen many people say, many atheists say, or people who've lost their faith, say, where is God? I don't hear him. I don't have any sense that he exists. Now, why is he ignoring me? And my advice to them is always the same. Listen better. He's calling you. And if you can get rid of all the crap that's stopping you from hearing, do it.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
advice. So far, excellent comments, everybody. Craig, did you want to say?
What are we doing exactly? We're just
Just
wrapping
kind
up.
of closing out. I'm going to go ahead and post links to all of your websites and connections, and of course, make more mention of the books and that kind of thing in the discussion in the beyond or below the video as soon as I post this video. So I'm going to post it tonight. So
Okay.
I just want to mention that. I'm going to try to see if I can do a premiere where people can comment on it. And if I am able to do that, I will email you to let you know. On direct message, actually.
Okay. Yeah, I pretty much won. Was it a contest? Wasn't a contest. It was good. It was a really good conversation. Better than I thought it was going to be, because it just turned into more of a open-ended kind of where we're all kind of talking deeply about issues that we all think about being, I guess we're all apologists sort of one degree or another. So we're more or less talking deeply about certain subjects that we all resonate with. So I thought it was actually a really good conversation, really productive. Probably one of the best ones that's been posted in a long time with just theists. I would think that a lot of atheists could get a lot out of this. There's a lot of food for thought in here. And like I said, I won. So there you go.
No, I agree with you.
Always
Actually, I'd
win,
love to
Craig.
have all of what I think it's been
We're all
wonderful that
winners?
you.
What did he say? We're all winners? Are we all winners?
I know. I said
Everyone gets a
you
prize?
always
That would
win.
be-
You
Oh, yeah,
always-
no, I do. I
Right.
definitely.
We know that.
But I think we all have similar experiences. And I think that was a good point, that it is a lot of our personal experiences. That's what brought us to God. And now we're just trying to figure out ways to encourage others, because they're not going to believe our personal experiences, as I've discovered. And I'm sure you all have too.
Oh, can I say one more thing before I one of the things I've started focusing on a lot on my channel, she was talking about spiritual experiences, because for me, that's how I became a Christian. There wasn't any logical arguments or anything like that. You know, I went to a church and I had an experience that was really powerful and really real to me. So that's what I've started talking about a lot on my channel, and trying to break down the mechanics of that, so that a person who isn't Christian or isn't spiritual at all can at least understand it. And I'm trying to siphon out all of the spiritual stuff, so that, you know, an atheist can listen, and I'm not saying anything that they have to believe, anything that they're not ready to believe. So I try to avoid all of the spiritual stuff, and trying to just give them the mechanics of the spiritual experience. And that's been one of my new projects. And I think it's going to be fruitful. So we'll see.
That's
We'll
good.
see. But
I think one thing I've learned on social media, if you go down the personal experience route, you will immediately get some form of a psychological evaluation where the atheist is more certain of your own experiences than you are.
Yeah.
right.
I've
noticed
gotten
to be
that.
the case. Yeah.
I don't even share half of my stories anymore, because I don't really like their psychological evaluations sometimes.
No, but the confidence, you know, they go from this. If you argue with somebody who's generally more civil, they will concede a lot of agnosticism. The more you get into a conversation, we don't know. But then you say something personal, and all of a sudden they are experts on who you are, and all of a sudden they know everything about you. You know, why you're a Christian, and what kind of experience you really had, and that Jesus was just a matter of indigestion, and that, you know, this kind of thing. You were just depressed and desperate, and therefore you became a
Right.
Christian. They cannot concede. I mean, you can. I know, Saida, you get this more than probably all of us, but you're the professional. But yet, despite your degrees and your experience and your your knowledge, you just had a kooky psychological experience, and now you're just off the charts wacky.
You got it.
I will say, just for arguments, just for everybody else, I will say, look, I have 2 degrees, I have a book, I have military experience. I came to Christ as an adult. I was not indoctrinated as a kid, but still, the length and the breadth and the depth that they will go to try to negate all that personal experience. I just turn around and I say, well, if you're going to take all of my personal experience down to the base level of my psychological, neurological evaluations, then what differentiates your neurological experiences from mine? And how do you know that your neurons are in a better position to assess my neurological arrangements. And that's where it gets down to. If you are going to hold to strict materialism and strict agnosticism, there's no way that you can give somebody on Twitter a psychological evaluation about the rightness to the wrongness of their behavior.
Oh, that's true. I like, that's one of those things that I think that all of us probably could be encouraged in giving our personal experiences. Even if somebody does that to us, I think it's a good idea to at least open up a little bit. And I just want to say something. Last week, I spoke at a Cru event on my campus. So it's a Christian Crusade. It's called Cru. And so I was the MC at this event. And we had these speakers who were businessmen and a doctor, very successful people. One of them was generating in revenues $130 million a year in his construction business, building high schools and that kind of thing. So they're very successful, and they shared their stories to students. And then I went around and I kind of told them a little bit about this pastor on the plane story, because I think that's the best one that I have. And it's a true story. But I just think I was trying to figure out if I can just give them a few little nuggets, like the trilemma, get a little C.S. Lewis in there. That was a game changer for me. And also just talk to them about when you were asking. I asked for 20 years. I didn't feel like I was getting an answer for 20 years. And then suddenly everything just started becoming enlightening for me. It was really kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I wasn't having a tragedy, just like you said, Daniel. It was all, life was pretty good. I just,
yeah. My experience was really weird. It was like I became a Christian when I was 26, but I don't have the black and white moment. I don't have the altar call moment. In fact, I was a little confused at first, because as a new Christian, as an adult, I didn't have this radical testimony. I felt like I had been on this long, slow, gradual ramp, and all of a sudden I found myself at the top of this mountain, and I'm looking around and I'm like, how did I get here? It really was at first kind of despairing, because you hear all these dramatic testimonies of people who are in the gutter on drugs about to die, or their heart was on their mouths, or they flipped upside down in a car 3,000 times and they lived somehow. I didn't have these. And I'm like,
be happy you should.
I didn't have these dramatic book, an experience you want to write a book about. I just was like, one day I believed in Jesus, and over the course of 3 months, I believed in the word. I was baptized, but I don't know, day, hour, minute. But having since now plodded through 26 years of faith in Christ, I now see that the personal experience of other people is not only valuable, but it is part of the affirming reality of my faith, that I'm not alone in this, that other people have these very similar, though different in details, experiences about an encounter with Jesus, the risen Jesus of Nazareth, who the gospel writers describe. And how is this such a universal phenomenon, anywhere from here in China to Africa to Korea to Siberia, or in a prison and who knows where? This is an object reality of living in this world. So many people have these similar encounters, Muslims, atheists, non-Christians, all coming to this person, this Jesus of Nazareth. And if it was really truly rooted in a subjective, psychological, neurological sort of state, there would be such a wide variety of these kinds of experiences and who actually Jesus is. But we all seem to come to this point that Jesus is Lord, and he is the Christ, he is the Son of the living God. And that's not something to sneeze at when you have so many people over so many centuries giving that same testimony over and over and over again.
It's true. Amen.
Great last word.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming in here and spending some time today. I know we discussed a lot of really great points, and it's great talking to such intellectuals. A lot of you have actually all of you have very great insights on so many different topics, that this is really fruitful. So I really appreciate that you're willing to come on my channel, and I want to say thank you.
Thanks
You're
for
welcome.
having us.
Okay, so I think I'm going to stop the recording. I don't know if I'm going to stop it where I'm jumping off altogether, but I'm just going to try right now. So
All right.
1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to, do you want to stop? Yes.